The dwelling room, the kitchen, was at the back of the house, facing inward between the blocks, looking at a scrubby back garden, and then at the ash pits. And in between the rows, between the long lines of ash pits, went the alley, where the children played, and the women gossiped, and the men smoked. So the actual conditions of living in the bottoms, that was so well built and looked so nice, were quite unsavory, because people must live in the kitchen, and the kitchens opened onto that nasty alley of ash pits. Mrs. Morrell was not anxious to move into the bottoms, which was already 12 years old and on the downward path when she descended to it from Bestwood. But it was the best she could do. Moreover, she had an end house in one of the top blocks, and thus had only one neighbor. On the other side, an extra strip of garden, and having an end house, she enjoyed a kind of aristocracy among the other women of the between houses, because her rent was 5 shillings and sixpence instead of 5 shillings a week. But this superiority in station was not much consolation to Mrs. Morrell. She was 31 years old and had been married 8 years, a rather small woman of delicate mould, but resolute bearing. She shrank a little from the first contact with the bottoms women. She came down in the July, and in the September expected her 3rd baby. Her husband was a miner. They had only been in their new home 3 weeks when the wakes or fair began. Morrell, she knew, was sure to make a holiday of it. He went off early on the Monday morning, the day of the fair. The 2 children were highly excited. William, a boy of 7, fled off immediately after breakfast to prowl round the wakes ground, leaving Annie, who was only 5, to whine all morning to go also. Mrs. Morrell did her work. She scarcely knew her neighbors yet, and knew no one with whom to trust the little girl. So she promised to take her to the wakes after dinner. William appeared at 12:30. He was a very active lad, fair-haired, freckled, with a touch of the Dane or Norwegian about him. "Can I have my dinner, Mother?" he cried, rushing in with his cap on. "As it begins at 1:30. The man says so." "You can have your dinner as soon as it's done," replied the mother. "Isn't it done?" he cried, his blue eyes staring at her in indignation. "Then I'm going to be without it." "You'll do nothing of the sort. It will be done in 5 minutes. It is only 12:30. "They'll be beginning," the boy half cried, half shouted. "You won't die if they do," said the mother. "Besides, it's only 12:30. You'll have a full hour." The lad began hastily to lay the table, and directly the 3 sat down. They were eating batter pudding and jam, when the boy jumped off his chair and stood perfectly stiff. Some distance away could be heard the first small braying of a merry-go-round and the tooting of a horn. His face quivered as he looked at his mother. "I told you," he said, running to the dresser for his cap. "Take your pudding in your hand. It's only 1:30. "So you were wrong. You haven't got your 2pence," said the mother in a breath. The boy came back, bitterly disappointed, for his 2 pence, and then went off without a word. "I want to go," said Annie, beginning to cry. "Well, you shall go, whining, wizening little stick," said the mother, and late in the afternoon she trudged up the hill under the tall hedge with her child. The hay was gathered from the fields, and cattle were turned on to the eddish. It was warm, peaceful. Mrs. Morrell didn't like the wakes. There were 2 sets of horses, one going by steam, one pulled around by a pony. 3 organs were grinding, and there came odd cracks of pistol shots, fearful screeching of the coconut man's rattle, shouts of the Aunt Sally man, screeches from the peep-show lady. The mother perceived her son gazing enraptured outside the Lion Wallace booth, at the pictures of this famous lion that had killed a Negro and maimed for life 2 white men. She left him alone.